Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Ontario Invasive Plant Council's 2017-2018 Winter Webinar Series. I'm Colin Casson, and I'm the coordinator of the Ontario Invasive Plant Council, and I'm hosting today's webinar here from snowy Peterborough, Ontario. If this is your first time joining the OIPC Winter Webinar Series for one of our webinars, welcome, and thanks for joining. If you're a returning customer, welcome back. The 2017-2018 OIPC Winter Webinar Series marks our 5th annual webinar series. This year's series is sponsored by the MNRF, and we're certainly appreciative of their support. As a reminder, recordings from previously presented OIPC webinars are available from the OIPC website at www.ontarioinvasiveplants.ca/webinars. That's the duration link you used, so you've already seen it. We are very proud of the quality of content presented in past webinars, and we want to invite you to make use of great resources for future training activities. Two quick housekeeping notes before we begin today's webinar. These have been placed on mute to start the webinar today. We want you to introduce yourself using the chat feature on the bottom right side of your screen, so all attendees can see who's joined us today. In it, our webinar presentation is going to begin, and it's going to last for approximately 45 to 50 minutes. We're going to follow that up with a question period after the presentations conclude. Now, on to the event. 2 years, we've had great webinar presentations by leaders in aquatic plant management in Ontario. These webinars are also preserved as recordings on our website if you'd like to consult them for a bit more background info on some of the projects you'll hear about today. Planning the 2017-2018 series, we heard from OIPC membership with a number of requests to paint a broader picture and provide some more context on aquatic invasive plant management that's happening across the province. With that in mind, today's webinar will feature 3 separate guest experts presenting on 3 very different aquatic invasive plants that are being managed actively across the province. We're going to hear from staff at Ducks Unlimited about European water chestnut and some control techniques, including physical control, that are being used to curb its growth. Second, we're going to hear from a man at Trent University on Watermilfoil and the biological control efforts that are being used to treat established populations of this plant. Lastly, we're going to hear from Robert at the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters Invading Species Awareness Program on use of herbicides to control water soldier populations in Ontario. With mind, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Foreman joins us from Kingston this morning, and over the past 10 years, Kyle has been involved with various aquatic plant management projects and programs within the academic, nonprofit, and private sectors. He continues his passion with Ducks Unlimited Canada as the coordinator of the European Water Chestnut Program based in Kingston, Ontario. Well, and I'm going to pass the controls over to you now.
Okay, thank you, Colin. Hopefully you can hear me just fine.
Good.
Okay, great. I'd like to thank everybody for taking the time to spend us over their lunch and learn a little bit about what we do in the aquatic plant management world. And specifically, I'm going to be talking about European chestnut and what we've been doing here at Ducks Unlimited since 2014. Well, first off, we'll start with identifying the plant. So what is water chestnut? It is a floating annual leaf plant. The floating leaves are rosette that go up from the stem of the plant, appearing in May and June. They're later this year, just with the high water that we had in 2017. As they're growing to the surface, these rosettes themselves will have small floats attached on the petiole of the plant, and the leaves to float to the surface and remain on the surface. Once those start to grow, you start to see multiple of these rosettes growing off of the stem. You do notice leaves that are fine and feather-like, and will kind of grow, and they look almost like filamentous roots floating in the water. On in the season, this year we saw June, but typically July, you see flowers starting to appear. The flowers will actually be there throughout season. And they consist of 4 very small petals and in color. About a week, these flowers are out. We start to see seed development occurring, and a dense, hard nut is developed on the underside of the plants where and fall beneath the plant and hang below rosette. And these 4 spined nuts become quite hardy and are woody outside with a fleshy outside. Once they fall, they remain in the sediment pretty close to where and provide the growth for the following season. Just to give you what the populations kind of look like of the plants as well as the plants. In the top left, we have a pretty community of water chestnut that's intermixed with some yellow white. Here, this is actually in Bayfield Bay on Wolfe Island at one of our management sites. And we can have denser populations. This is one just inside Kingston city limits at Bell Island, one that we're managing this year. As well, the bottom left corner, an up close of what the leaves look like, as well as the center of that rosette with a flower in the center there. Once you turn over the plant a few weeks later, you start to see those trapezoidal shaped nuts starting to grow. And once they've sediment grown, then you start to see this plant has been growing color, and it's a woody nut that can actually warp and shore and be quite harmful. So why is this plant a problem? Well, it creates dense floating mats that outcompete native plants. These mats can actually decay in lower levels that can cause fish kills. They can really impact habitat for waterfowl and other wildlife as well as fish, and impact navigation and recreational use of the waterways. As mentioned, are sharp and can be quite hazard for when washed up on shore. So we have a bit of a illustration in the bottom right corner, which was kind of a python-themed foot dropping down on the themselves, but unfortunately, information won't work with this webinar. Problems with the plant. It has been listed as a prohibited species under the new Invasive Species Act. It's one of 16 aquatic species on the list. And we are taking great steps in order to control the plant. How did it get? It was actually introduced as an ornamental in the late 1800s, and historically through the Concord River and Hudson River areas of New York, where it spread right across 10 states within the northeastern seaboard, and spread predominantly by seed, and then secondarily by floating rosettes. As mentioned earlier, it is an annual plant, so all growth in a year is due to dropping seed. So, which is quite interesting. So, does happen from rosettes that we do see that are dislodged from the stem. This would provide some of that long-range transport. It was first observed in 2006. Just to give you, when it was first observed in 2006, this was at Voyageur Provincial Park at the top of your screen, Ottawa. And since then, we've had 2 other populations that were observed in the Kingston in 2011 and in the Rideau River near Ottawa in 2014. Of the distribution through the U.S. You see kind of how it's moved kind of the Hudson River and Mohawk River watersheds and spread across the I guess northeast seaboard of the U.S. But has become it's relatively introduced to a lot of areas of Ontario, which is pretty so far. So for there are like made of different management techniques that can be used on mechanical, chemical, and biological controls. So what we do, we employ a mechanical control for the plant at the sites that we've been managing since 2014. And the picture on the left is our summer student that was through a partner with the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters and Species Awareness Program, one of their HIT squad members, who last the summer handling the plant throughout our locations in the Mayfield Bay Wolfe Island area. The bottom is actually a harvester that was created by staff with Ontario Parks at Wolfe Provincial Park. So that location in 2006, is quite a population than what we're dealing with, and employ the use of this cutter boat that cuts from the stems of the plant below the surface of the water, and from a second John boat that is set up with tines in order to collect those as they're floating in the water column and remove them from the water. This method they do have to repeat time and time again because the plants themselves will grow from the root and the stems that are left remain in the water below the cutter. And they've had really good success so far and continue to see great results. Like our project, we have based on timing of education of the plant, it was fairly rapid in order to get a program in place with Ducks Unlimited and our partners, and have been able to stay ahead of the population through hand pulling. So we're able to remove the entire plant relatively easily by hand. And over time, it's seen quite a good result. Chemical used in the U.S., 2,4-D and triclopyr is typically what's used. In Canada, it is on the label for reward with the active ingredient diquat. However, been treated as of yet in Ontario. That's being done at the Nature Conservancy in New York, along with Cornell University, to look at biological control, and rather looking at a Galericella beetle, basically looking into host specificity test time, and is available at this time. So actually, we might have some extra tools that we can add to the toolbox here in Ontario. But for now, mechanical harvesting and hand pulling is highly effective for this plant. The areas here with Ducks Unlimited as part of the European Water Chestnut program consist of a population that was identified at Bayfield Bay in on Wolfe Island, just south of Kingston. So I have a map here of the Kingston Wolfe Island area, and in 2011, this population was identified by Canada Wildlife Service, and in 2014, through the efforts of our here at Ducks Unlimited, and the biggest coordinator, I had a new population at Button Bay that summer as well. Population at Bell Island in Kingston in 2015, at Wolfe Island in 2016. And we'll be talking about the Lewis Bay population towards the end of the presentation. So what have we seen so far? Our hand pulling has been fairly successful to date. Been performed since 2014 and through the last, I guess, 4 consecutive seasons, summer seasons. Typically, this takes place once the plants have reached a certain size, and that's about diameter as the plants are reaching that maturity. This year, we're a little bit late to starting with our actual management efforts, and this was due to the plants. We didn't see any rosettes actually on Wolfe Island until the week of July. 2 weeks, July 18th, we know that the plants were at a size that we could start to pull them, as well as started to flower. And it wasn't long after that, a couple of weeks, until we see seed development. 3 populations that we had known about when we started our sampling and removal. It took us 7 days of good days in order to remove the plants, and this was all done by hand pulling. So using, I guess, the hard work of our OFH student as well as myself, from either boat, we're able to remove all the plants within these areas we were able to see. For the majority, most of the plants came out of Bayfield Bay, our largest population. In total, we did see quite a we did identify a % decrease since the initial start of the program. And so just to give you an idea, roughly biomass was removed. In 2014, 60 large garbage containers, 125 liters, and 60 of those were removed in the first season, whereas we removed 11 in the 2017 season. So really seeing a drastic reduction. We're at about a fifth of the biomass that we're removing at these locations. Browns Bay population that was identified in 2016 was actually part of an outreach through our Wolfe Island information session that we held for residents. Which informed us in 2016 about these plants that she identified in this bay. We returned in 2017, and luckily, all the hard efforts of Justin White, the previous coordinator, put to good, and we did not see any additional 2017 season. Now, hand pulling is an effective tool that we use, but unfortunately, it can't be used in every situation. We did an area, the population identified at Bell Island, right in Kingston. There are over sediment toxicity and exposure to staff and re-releasing some of that sediment into the water column. So this is a site that we will be looking at doing a herbicide application in the 20s, and so we're kind of putting our row in order to move forward with that and see if we can build that suite of different use instruments. But regardless of that, we have seen great results with hand pulling itself. So as our time actively populations is decreasing, we're going to be putting more time towards surveillance of the plant. What's really interesting in Ontario is we don't have a very high population of water chestnut into our neighbors to the south. So within the state of New York, there are 44 counties where water chestnut is present, and 20 territories and coastal embayments along Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River. Water chestnut has been present or has been identified. So what we've done is created a list of highly probable areas where water chestnut could occur within Lake Ontario and the St. Lawrence River, and we perform surveillance to identify or find plants in these areas that are likely to be affected once our management has been completed. In the season, we have 40 locations between Brighton to the west and Ganaway to the east, with sites Prince Edward County and Island. This allowed us to actually identify a new population here on Wolfe Island. And September 25th, we had a new population just downstream of our largest population on Bayfield Bay. This site was this year's by the Water Chestnut crew, and is a fairly new population that's been identified. It was with a GPS, hand GPS, and over a 3-year period, we removed all of the plant biomass that was present. We are expecting to see growth. The plants themselves did have mature seeds that were sitting and to fall off the plants. We removed the majority of what we could. Unfortunately, seeds had dropped and likely had been dropping before we identified the population. And we'll be back in 2018 to continue management and really looking to reduce the seed bank. So moving in 2018, we will be visiting all these sites that were previously mentioned that we're controlling. Revisit Browns Bay, where we didn't identify any plants in 2017, but just ensure that that seed bank has been depleted. We'll be looking to treat a population with herbicide at Bell Island and continue our surveillance downstream, more through the Thousand Islands and St. Lawrence River towards Cornwall, and continue upstream as well along the coastal wetlands of Lake Ontario. And to pass this back off to Colin.
Thank you very much, Kyle. So to steal back from you. Off and running here. So our next speaker is Amanda Cooper, and Amanda, a graduate of Trent University's Ecological Restoration Program, has been working in the environmental field for the past 5 years. Throughout time, Amanda has both assisted with and managed biological control projects across Ontario, focus on mitigation of Eurasian watermilfoil using the native weevil. In recent years, Amanda's work has focused on implementing vegetated benthic mats as part of integrated management approach for aquatic plant growth. And partnership has been achieved through Trent University and Big Cedar Lake. So with that in mind, over to Amanda.
Hello. Yes, so Colin mentioned, I've had the opportunity for the past 3 years to manage or coordinate biological control projects at Big Cedar Lake, is what I want to focus mainly on in this presentation. However, I'll start off by just describing what Eurasian watermilfoil is like and different control methods that have been used. But first, I want to just go through rather quickly so I can address the projects that have been in place and sort of focus on biological control. In this presentation, I'll probably refer to Eurasian watermilfoil as simply just milfoil, just for the sake of running through phrases and sentences pretty smoothly. And you might also see the acronym EWM in place, and that just simply means Eurasian watermilfoil. Okay. It is an invasive rooted submersed perennial aquatic plant. It's quite green in color, and the new growth will be more vibrant green. The apical meristem of this plant is reddish in color, so that's the very tip of the plant. And you can see this arrow right now, but it produces also a small reddish flower that emerges above the water surface. And the leaves are whorled around the stem at nodes that go up the meristem, typically in whorls of 4. Successfully colonized in ponds and in rivers and in lakes and at different depths. It primarily reproduces through root development. So although it's capable of spreading by seed, the germination rarely takes place. And this plant also auto-fragments during its growth season, so roots can develop at each of those nodes where the whorls of leaves are. And any sort of disturbance to the plant can, like wave action or boat motors going through it, can also cause the plant to break off at those nodes where the roots would be forming, and those adventitious roots will then sediment and develop into a whole new plant of its own. So it makes it really good at colonizing environments. This plant, as I mentioned, can grow in a variety of depths and can grow through the water column and then also create a mat or a sort of canopy over top of the water, which will also make it seem as a sort of monoculture. Reaches its peak growth in late summer, and then it will die back to the root crown, so these large root masses that are in the sediment in the late fall. And then once the water warms up in the spring, new shoots will begin to grow from those overwintering roots. It's native to Europe, Asia, and North Africa, and it was first seen in the United States in the early 1940s in Wisconsin, and later in the 1960s in Lake Erie in Ontario. it can be spread through accidental and intentional introductions. So very common in the aquarium and ornamental pond industries, and then when disposed of, they make their way into the waterways. They also transfer very easily through those fragments, like I mentioned. So they'll hitchhike on boat propellers and on equipment, anything like that, and once transferred to new water bodies, the fragments will be able to develop themselves and establish themselves in the sediment there. There are implications for Eurasian watermilfoil, three of the main ones being that dense canopy that forms on the top of the water that shades out the native vegetation. There's the species composition as a whole. It also complicates recreational activities like fishing and boating and can make swimming through it almost impossible as well. And aesthetically, it can reduce property values. So a lot of people like to have a swimming hole at the end of their dock rather than a mass of plants that they can't seem to swim through. Control options. Physical or mechanical examples include dredging and mechanical harvesters. So dredging can be longer term and also can be more selective at just controlling milfoil itself, because it's typically diver assisted, so that can manually pick up milfoil in the patch and just dredge that rather than the native species around it. Kind of slow and also very expensive as a process. Harvesters can provide direct relief. They're pretty immediately effective. Basically, they just mow through a big patch and clear up all the plants. However, it can also indirectly harvest native plants and other species as well. The main issue with this is that it can also aid in the spreading of milfoil because there's not a proper catchment device in place. Any of the fragments that aren't collected in the harvester will then be able to be transferred around the lake and just continue establishing new plants and populations elsewhere. Control for milfoil has been a little bit more popular in the States. It's fast-acting, relatively inexpensive, so that's why some people would prefer it. However, it's the sense of diquat, which is the only licensed chemical for use in Ontario. It's not species-specific, so where you spray that, it's not only going to get invasive milfoil, but other natives as well. To not be as effective in turbid water, so it could be of good use in areas where it's a bay, a sheltered bay where there's not much wave action, and when it's a thick monoculture of predominantly milfoil. It also can give off a bit of a negative public perception. A lot of people not prefer to put chemicals in their lake and where they're going to be swimming. Get to biological control, which chemical can give a good positive public perception because you're using a native species that naturally would prefer to feed on the invasive species. So an example of this is the native milfoil weevil, Myriophyllum leconte, and it's been used widely in the States for biological control and also a bit in Ontario, which I will get into. However, with these biological control agents, you tend to need a lot of them to cause enough damage, and that can get quite costly. Going into biological control projects that I participate in at Big Cedar Lake, we start off with a lab culture that we've had at Trent University, which is essentially rows of tanks, aquarium tanks, and we collect milfoil that we put in those tanks, and then we also fill the tanks with approximately 100 or 150 adult weevils that we also collect. And so those weevils are left for about 5 days to mate, and then they will lay their eggs on the very tips of the plant, the apical meristem, and we take those plants from the tanks, bundle them up with twist ties, and we transport them to the lake. We then go to the patch and we collect all of the tips, or a bunch of tips of the milfoil together, and then we twist tie the bundle onto them. So the eggs will be transferred within that area of the patch, and the eggs hatch into larvae. They'll bore into the stem, causing most of the damage, and then as they pupate, they chew a hole through the stem, also adults, and that also can cause damage to the stem, kind of breaking it off at that area. Map of Big Cedar Lake. It shows all the sites that we've had since 2015. The pink triangles represent control sites. The yellow X's are sites that were stocked with just weevils, and the red are sites that got weevils and also vegetated benthic mats, which I will get into later. And so the green circles represent a data on a full lake survey that we did this summer, in September actually. And what we did basically was put a grid over this whole map, and we made the points 40 meters away from each other. So we had 700 points across the lake that we would go to, and we would measure MILF density, so the amount of stems per meter squared. And larger circles represent areas that have that are more dense with milfoil, that have the most milfoil. In 2015, working with Trent, we stocked 25,000 weevils across 4 sites, and when we reassessed these sites in 2016 for milfoil density, we saw that there was a significant effect that weevil stocking had on milfoil density. When we revisited in 2016, the sites were either nearly or completely eradicated of milfoil. However, when we first assessed these same sites in 2017, we saw that there was no longer a significant effect from weevil stocking in 2015. The milfoil recognized in many of these sites, to a point which was even higher than that in 2015. So the sites that were stocked with weevils still had a lower milfoil density than our control sites that were not stocked, which are the dashed lines there. So the fact that the stocking effect was significant after 1 year, it kind of suggests for stocking those sites with weevils. In 2018, we stocked 4,000 weevils across 5 sites. In addition, 3 of those 5 sites got vegetated benthic mats. I'll put mats up very briefly with some images so that it makes a little bit more sense. But essentially, or statistically, the 2016 treatments did not affect milfoil density. However, the density increased less at our treatment sites than in the control sites. So, yeah, both the weevil and mat sites did increase as much as our control site did in terms of milfoil density. And the weevil-treated areas, the larger dashed lines at the bottom, they started out in 2016 with lower density, which would suggest why we saw the relatively low density again in 2017. After these few years, we started to see some trends in density. So the first point being the possibility of diminishing returns on weevil stocking. So this was an idea that was mentioned by Miller et al. They developed a predictive model which suggests that when weevil populations are initially high in the season, there are only a limited number of opportunities for additional weevils to cause further damage to healthy patches. The model further suggests that Eurasian watermilfoil's ability to auto-fragment and reproduce, along with the weevil's dependence on this plant as a habitat, means that the populations of both will eventually reach an equilibrium, and stocking weevils indefinitely would lead to diminishing returns. So if you start off like in 2015 with a lot of milfoil, and then you introduce a bunch of weevils, those weevils are going to use that for habitat and food, and it's going to bring the milfoil populations down. And then so for the next year, those don't have as much milfoil to survive off of, and then in return, the weevil population will go down. So there's this need for balance between the two. Second point is colonization of milfoil in our 2015 experiment sites. So we see that when milfoil dominates these patches, it makes it difficult for native species to arrive rapidly and in large enough quantities. So it causes a lack of effective competition for the natives, especially after the weevil-induced collapses. It's possible that this low native species propago pressure is the reason why there's poor recovery of natives after you remove the milfoil. So we're thinking that this is what we're seeing in Big Cedar, and that milfoil collapses, so when a lot of it's eradicated, one year it's going to be followed by a milfoil recolonization, unless, of course, there's effective competition from native plants. So looking at this figure, you can see that there's kind of been this up and down pattern back and forth year to year, starting 2013, where milfoil density is higher and then lower and then higher and then lower. And so in 2016, we see that milfoil density was at its lowest ever since having all of this data, and followed by, since 2013, and that was followed by a huge spike in 2017. Two patterns that we've been noticing with that. And the last one is the continued evidence of weevil saturation in this lake. So all our experiments in terms of checking for weevil damage on this lake have similarities in that weevil stocking does not appear to have a large effect on weevil damage. So in our treatment sites and control sites, we measure for how much damage is caused to these plants, and there's really not a big difference between the two. So it suggests that the weevils are very common in the lake because the damage isn't much different between treated areas and control areas. So there's a healthy population there. It might be somewhat saturated. So looking back at this graph and this sort of trend you see, after 2012, we dropped to a point where it's kind of plateaued, and it hasn't gone lower than the values we see in 2014, 2016. So now there's sort of, the weevils alone aren't going to get us any lower than that point. So that's why we feel there's a need for a more integrated approach, adding something else to the picture to maybe bring that down even more. Some conclusions about what we've seen over the past few years is that the milfoil densities, like I said, alter from higher to lower, and it's unlikely that weevil alone will completely eradicate milfoil from the whole lake. So 2017, this past summer, 40,000 weevils were stocked across 6 sites, and each of those 6 sites also got a vegetated benthic mat. These benthic mats are made out of coconut husk, or coir as they call, and what we do is we go out to the patch and we, once these mats are saturated, they will sink, we'll reinforce them with blocks and boulders, and then you transplant native species into the mats. And on the picture on the left, you can sort of see the taller plants that are around the mat. That's milfoil. And in those areas around the mat is where we would then stock the weevils. So you're kind of suppressing milfoil around the mat, where the native species are going to want to try to establish themselves and compete that encroaching milfoil. on, our recommendations for future milfoil management at Big Cedar Lake, we definitely suggest focusing on encouraging those native plants to compete with milfoil. Also, continued monitoring of our experimental patches from 2015 and on is important in terms of confirming our speculations, and then going back and doing another full lake survey again of all of those points. We just did the first one the end of this summer, and so doing another one of those would be great. Help make predictions about where milfoil might colonize again around the lake and where it's most dense. So selecting a material for the mat that can prevent milfoil growth while also allowing adequate room for native transplants. So go to the picture of the mats. I don't know if you can tell, but the holes in the mats are about 3/4 of an inch, and we saw that milfoil was still able to grow through in some of these areas. So a big idea there would be to have the hole sizes either smaller or different material where milfoil is less likely to grow through there, but still able to put native transplants in. And then lastly, we suggest installing those mats when density is low. So allowing those natives to compete at a time that makes sense. For instance, going back to this graph, in 2015, our experimental sites, milfoil density was high, and then when we revisited them in 2016, they were almost completely eradicated of milfoil. That would have been a good time to put those mats in, allow natives to establish themselves before having milfoil return with a vengeance in 2017. That concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Amanda. So last on our docket for here we have Robert McGowan. Robert has been working in the environmental field for the past 12 years and working as the Water Soldier Management Technician out of the Invading Species Awareness Program, or ISAP, for the past 4 years. In this role, Robert has led ISAP in terms of monitoring, surveillance, and control of water soldier populations on the Trent River. Robert.
It's a pleasure to be here. Good afternoon. My name is Robert McGowan. I'm working with the Invading Species Awareness Program and Water Soldier Management Technician. Today I'm speaking with you about the management of water soldier in Ontario and what tools are used in this eradication efforts. Overview of what we'll be talking about today, what water soldier is, the morphology of water soldier, soldier in Ontario, past management, and of course what we're talking about is the herbicide treatments. Okay, so what is water soldier? Water soldier is an invasive perennial aquatic plant that is native to Europe and Northwest Asia. The first known wild population in North America was discovered in the Trent River in 2008 near the Trent River. Water soldier was used as an ornamental plant in water gardens and is a likely source of its introduction into the Trent River. Is water soldier a problem? Much like the other two species that you heard today, it forms dense mats of floating vegetation. It coats native vegetation, resulting in decreased plant biodiversity. It has a potential to alter surrounding water chemistry, which may harm phytoplankton and other aquatic organisms. Then floating mats of water soldier can hinder recreational activities such as boating, angling, hunting, and swimming. Sharp serrated leaf edges can cut swimmers, individuals who handle water soldier plants, and caution should be taken whenever you're handling the plant. The morphology of water soldier. Water soldier is a weakly rooted, submerged, as well as free-floating hydrophyte. It sinks in late fall and overwinters as a rosette with green leaves. In summer, some of the rooted rosettes float to the surface, while others stay as a submerged plant. The rosette leaves can grow up to 60 centimeters in length, are brittle, and have serrated margin of sharp spines. Water soldier rosettes can resemble the top of a pineapple or an aloe plant. Emergent form breaches the water surface and has stiff, erect leaves with serrated spines on the margin. Both the water soldier produce turions and offsets, which are the primary method of reproduction. Ontario. Water was first discovered in the Trent Severn Waterway in September of 2008, just upstream of Highway 30 Bridge in the hamlet of Trent Hills. Little information was available on the life cycle and management of water soldier or its implications in Ontario waters. The observations of rapid growth and development into dense monospecific stands led to a risk assessment conducted by Trent University, confirmed that water soldier poses a significant environmental and economic threat, and water soldier has since spread 30 kilometers downstream. The second wild population was found in October of 2015 by the MNRF Aurora District staff. Discovered a colony of water soldier in the Black River in the town of Sutton, Ontario. Follow-up investigations assessed the colony at 300 to 400 plants, with 2 small isolated colonies downstream. These plants were upstream of the Sutton Dam. So, ponds across southern and central Ontario have been reported and confirmed to have water soldier populations. These ponds are being managed by MNRF district offices and us at the Ontario Federation of Anglers and Hunters. Because of the significant environmental and economic threat water soldier poses, an interagency working group was formed in 2013 to help coordinate research, monitoring, and control prevention strategies. An integrated management plan was drafted to guide management decisions to eradicate water soldier from Ontario waters. The group helped to develop the Water Soldier Integrated Management Plan to inform decisions for treatment of water soldier. The management plan provides guidance on key actions and tactics that can be taken to achieve the following objectives. The first objective is to prevent the introduction and spread of water soldier to new locations in Ontario. 2 is to implement early detection and rapid response to locate and eradicate new water soldier populations within Ontario. The third action is to eradicate established populations of water soldier from public waters in Ontario. And the fourth action is to work with private sector to identify and eradicate water soldier from private ponds in Ontario. So we're going to quickly touch base on the control methods laid out in the IMP and the effectiveness of them when they've been implemented. So then removal. Initial control efforts resulted in hand removal of about 20,000 water soldier plants in the first year of detection. Efforts to remove the plants were met with mixed success. Ultimately, the use of this method was deemed pretty inefficient and costly. So we today still do hand removal efforts when we seem fit, but if we're looking at doing a large-scale hand removal, we usually kind of pass on it because it's too labor-intensive and cost-effective. It's not cost-effective. Mechanical harvester. We ran a pilot control project in 2015 with funding that we received from the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. We implemented the project on Lake Seymour to determine the efficacy of the mechanical harvester to help in the eradication of water soldier. 190 cubic yards of water soldier biomass was removed, covering approximately 1 hectare of surface area. It appeared that this water soldier should be susceptible to the mechanical harvesting due to its floating and emergent growth form and weak rooting structure. The plant mass, shallow water, and numerous snags in the Trent Severn Waterway present considerable obstacles to cost-efficient harvesting. Enclosures. Summer 2016, polyethylene shade cloth was tested on 3 patches of emergent water soldier for a period of 2 months. The 10-foot by 10-foot enclosures were fashioned with rebar, landscape fabric, and ties. This project was to test the theory that preventing sunlight from reaching the water soldier plants would eliminate the population. Following the treatment, reductions of 99 to 100% of the water soldier biomass were seen across each of the plots. A great management tool to address small isolated populations, but does have its limitations when it comes to the size of the enclosure itself. There's another effort laid out in the integrated management plan, the diver assisted suction harvesting, which we have yet to because of and there is no biocontrol known at this point. So let's get into the herbicide. Reward bromide. Reward is a herbicide that's used to treat the water soldier populations. Does the Reward work? It's a non-selective, fast-acting herbicide which damages only the parts of the plant which it is applied to. It binds strongly with soil and has low mobility in the environment. Reward works on the energy production step of photosynthesis. It is required as well as photosynthesis for this herbicide to kill susceptible plants. Herbicides that inhibit photosystem 1 are considered to be a contact herbicide and are often referred to as membrane disruptors. The result is that cell membranes are rapidly destroyed, resulting in leakage of cell contents into the intercellular spaces. So initial water soldier management options in 2009 focused on the application of Reward, treatments being applied in late September and a reapplication in October of the same year. Initial herbicide efforts saw 0.45 hectares of the river treated with herbicide under an emergency label extension from the Pest Management Regulatory Agency. To these field efforts, a series of greenhouse trials at the University of Florida conducted by Michael Netherland evaluated the impact of Reward on water soldier. Research efforts confirmed that water soldier mother plants and offsets are susceptible to Reward, while turbidity, temperature, and plant maturity can play a role in Reward efficacy. These issues can be overcome in the Trent Severn waterway through timing of the through rate and exposure of the herbicide. Water soldier is an evergreen perennial and actively growing late into the season after native plants have died back. Because Reward is a broad spectrum herbicide, its application in the fall reduces impacts on other native aquatic plants. Fall treatments also result in fewer restrictions to the residents in the area who are likely to be out hunting, swimming, or using the water to water their gardens. The use of Reward in the Trent Severn waterway requires a permit from Parks Canada and the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. The treatment must also be conducted by a licensed aquatic exterminator. Herbicide applications in 2014. Water soldier was permanently added to the Reward label based on the application by the manufacturer to the PMRA. So there's no need for future label future emergency label extensions. The MNRF developed a management plan, refined the resolution of the surveillance grid to 50 meter by 50 meter, and extended the monitoring area to include Crow Bay after it was discovered Healy Falls in 2014. Herbicide application was a pilot control project to determine the efficacy of a large-scale treatment. F contracted DBI services to apply Reward to 50 hectares in Lake Seymour and Crow Bay. In the spring of 2015, the survey revealed that there was success in shallow areas with minimal flow. Expected that higher than normal water levels could be a factor in preventing the success that was anticipated. So herbicide application 2015. The 2015 management plan targeted both large established water soldier populations as well as small outliers in Lake Seymour. Just over 145 hectares of water soldier was treated in more than 29 plots. Results for this large-scale herbicide application indicate that water soldier is much more sensitive to Reward when applied over larger plot sizes. Water soldier biomass had decreased significantly in all sites when sampled in June, about 8 months after the treatment. In September, all sites contained significantly less biomass than the pre-treatment levels. There was a 100% biomass reduction recorded in 2 of the sample sites, but the impact of Reward varied on a site-to-site basis. As you can see in these pictures are pretty standard for telling the tale of how successful Reward has been on water soldier. You can see the picture in the top, 2015. The resident who this property takes these pictures. See that they're pretty infested there with water soldier. They can barely even get their boat out. And after the herbicide treatment in 2015, you can see in 2016, the lower picture, that the herbicide treatment was successful. And when we say site-to-site basis, this is a back sheltered bay, so we saw some real success in certain areas that year. Trent University research. The MNRF was interested in evaluating if a follow-up reward application in growing season would increase efficacy to award consideration for reward applications. University investigated the following. They compared reward efficacy between October application only and October application followed by a July application. 5 hectare plots were treated with reward during October 2015 and then treated in July 2016 to see if it had increased the likelihood of water soldier eradication as compared to the plots which only received the fall treatment. Only reward application resulted in an average of 95% reduction in water soldier when large-scale monitoring plots were resampled 11 months later after treatment. A subsequent 80% increase in native plant biomass. The increased efficacy associated with the July follow-up applications, and you see in the graph here, indicates that the manager should kind of continue to focus on the flat applications, only the submerged reward applications. Herbicide Application 2016. New populations of water soldier were found in Percy's Reach in 2015. This population was found 15 kilometers downstream from the populations that were found in Crow Bay in 2014. Filling the upstream water soldier populations in the Trent Severn waterway was the highest management priority in 2016. So it would be Lake Seymour. The water soldier herbicide treatment was completed in mid-October, and 117 hectares of water soldier treated in Lake Seymour, sectors in Crow Bay, and in Percy's Reach, and this was done over a 2-day period. Application 2017. Between October 2nd and 5th, 2017, over 250 hectares of the Trent River was treated with reward. Lake Management applied the herbicide to approximately 250 hectares in Lake Seymour, 9 in Crow Bay, 8 hectares in Percy's Reach, and 5 hectares near Wilson Island. In 2018, we will assess the success of the 2017 treatment. Water soldier was first discovered in 2008. There was no literature relating to the species outside of its native range. So since then, a lot of knowledge gaps have been filled, such as growth capabilities, reproductive ecology, and management response. Gaps have been filled, have highlighted future research directions for the continued study of eradication efforts in water soldier in Ontario. And these include testing additional aquatic herbicides for future use on water soldier. How are we going to increase the efficacy of scale herbicide applications, especially on the smaller patches less than a hectare? We find that we don't know what's really going on with the herbicide have enough residency time in those patches. Develop passive monitoring techniques. So we're looking at using drones to monitor water soldier. Understanding the post-management recovery and restoration of native plants. Priority. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rob. Okay, so time webinar where we try and turn it over to the audience. It's a very information-rich webinar, I think, we had today. I see a couple questions are starting to file in here into the chat box. Just a quick reminder to everybody, you can go ahead and to write some questions in. If you'd prefer, if you have maybe a kind of a more detailed question you'd like to pose to any of our 3 presenters, please feel free to go ahead and just type in your name in the box with the word unmute beside you, and when we get to you, I'll unmute you so that everybody on the webinar can hear. And so just, I see a couple questions starting to come in, but just before I jump into it, just a very kind of quick recap just to jog everybody's memory. So leading off, we had Kyle Borrowman from Ducks Unlimited. Kyle was presenting to us on European water chestnut. So really nice physical control techniques being spoken about there. Also, Kyle mentioned a few herbicide potential options that are available in the future. We heard from Amanda Cooper talking about Eurasian Watermilfoil and some of the Biocontrol and benthic mat options that are available in that regard. And then we heard from Robert McGowan from OAH, who spoke to us a little bit about water soldier and some of the herbicide other approaches that are being used to manage historically for water soldier. So now is the time to jump in. I'm going to go ahead and lead off with some of the questions we have coming in here. And So we have a question that's of herbicides in Ontario. So we have a question, do many landowners and municipalities use diclot? I know that's kind of one of your, so you're using diclot primarily.
Yeah.
Do you want to speak a little bit about that and about who's registered and licensed to use that product?
Well, I'm not sure about municipalities using diclot, but I know that there are registered herbicide applicators in Ontario that a landowner could hire to treat invasive species waterfront. They would just have to go through the proper routes in terms of permitting, whether it be through the Trent Waterway or the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry or the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change. If you have a very specific question, you could probably send me an email and I could put you in touch with some people who know are more versed in that question.
Okay, and I know that, and the asker was saying Eurasian Watermilfoil tends to be, that's one of the major control techniques for that, is right, Amanda? Is the use of diclot. I know that some municipalities like Milton have used that in the past as well for kind of public spaces and ponds. Obviously being applied by registered herbicide applicators licensed for use of that, but it is something that seems to be used for milfoil as well, right?
Yeah.
So another question coming in, might be for everyone who might chime in, but just the person about kind of the health of intact and resilient systems and the ability of them to resist invasions. And so somebody's, I guess, tying this into the aquatic plant conversation here, but wondering if the removal of native plants by shoreline property owners was able to facilitate the establishment of invasives. I think we probably all see good examples of that, right? Disturbance seems to really be linked ultimately with the establishment of some of these invasives. Are you with us here?
Yep. Can you hear me just fine there, Colin?
Yeah. Do you see any maybe examples of that kind of in your case studies?
Yeah, absolutely. I think especially one of the things, I guess, what makes an invasive do so well is usually those early successional areas being able to happen on newly opened environments. So I guess speaking with, it's the same with milfoil, water soldier, those two perennials, they remain somewhat evergreen, even under the so as early in the able to reach the surface and like other species really quickly. So if they're given the advantage over others, that's definitely a possibility. Same with water chestnut, where you have that early growth in up in blank surface and lifting light to the natives. So if they're able to in a lot of ways, like fragmentation as well. Eurasian Watermilfoil is good at what it does, and can move into an area with wave action, for example. And we same thing in terrestrial systems. For example, we found the 400 series highways with new development or being done, and quickly allowing, say, dog strangling vine or phragmites to take over.
I guess, Amanda, that's kind of the flip side of what you're speaking about by introducing competition, right? Is that you're trying to restore that kind of balance and resilience within a system to prevent further invasion into it. So it's the same idea, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got nothing coming in. So how timely that you bring up frag. So we have another question that came in, just talking about the overlap between some of these species. So maybe a question for the group, I'm talking about primarily submerged species and some having different stages to their seasonality as well, where they become emergent. But do the three of you ever kind of see that overlap interface between frag stands and some of the three species we heard about today?
I've seen much frag on along Lake Seymour down to Percy's Reach personally.
Yeah, and Kyle, you're working in a little bit more shallow environments with water chestnut, right? So do you ever see that interface between frag and water chestnut popping up?
So luckily, we don't have a lot of that issue either. Mostly because, excuse me, in the Kingston area, we don't have a lot of phragmites in our coastal wetlands relative to, further west on Lake Ontario and southwestern Ontario. But one thing I would mention, we do see quite a bit of chestnut that will get caught up in cattail. I'm sure there would be some of the same. The one that I really noticed this past summer, though, working in the coastal wetlands on Wolfe Island, is the amount of frog bit that can actually kind of that in those areas. So not only through cattails, where it's also on Wolfe Island, but within the those edge area Phragmites as well. These species that we're talking about today, the submersed as well as water soldier and water chestnut, are really a more open water species away from that interface with Phragmites.
So it's perfect that we have that picture there on the left because it's a little bit grayed out, but that's a nice stand of, on the terrestrial side we've seen some purple loosestrife, but there's also a little bit of water soldier and frog bit too. So when they tend to happen in clusters, I guess. And that actually leads into another nice question here. So we've got another question about, somebody's mentioning the idea of invasion meltdown. So I think this is maybe best directed at Rob, but if anybody else has any content or comments, that'd be great. But do we see any kind of anecdotal observations on areas that are infested by things like water soldier, I guess higher populations of other bases? I know kind of anecdotally we've seen some rusty crayfish in really dense patches as well.
Yeah, rusty crayfish, zebra mussels are utilizing the rosette of the soldier a lot, and there's a lot of surface area on there for them to kind of utilize. Frog is the one that Kyle mentioned where where the cattails, they see that a lot, but cattails are native. But other residents have said that they've seen a decrease in zebra mussels in their front water, on the water property, since water soldier's been there. So that's interesting. I don't know how accurate it is. It's just an observation from an owner, but you pick up the water soldier, especially when we're doing the mechanical harvesting, we saw a lot of the zebra mussels kind of in soldier attached to the inside of the rosette.
Because, yeah, we see a lot of zebra mussels attached to milfoil stems, and I want to say clear, a lot of the residents have said that their zebra mussel problem is kind of water clarity for milfoil to grow even deeper, let's say. So, and then the zebra mussels also have kind of seemed to have had an impact on maybe having collapsed the plants even. Like, there's an idea there because the stems will be completely covered in mussels and it becomes heavy and they keel over, maybe even out of the photic zone. So it's kind of interesting interaction there.
Like a benthic mat.
Yeah, really.
So we've got another question here. So if you do have any more questions, feel free to type them in the chat box there. We just had one come in about seed viability, so I think that's best for water chestnut. Kyle, you talked a little bit about expressing that seed bank there. Do you have any information on how long these seeds are lasting?
Yeah, so the seeds typically last about 10 to 12 years. There are where it's over 6 years, roughly, the seed viability starts to decrease. The thing with this plant, I guess, in terms of annual having a relatively low seed set in comparison to other species, we're talking about maybe upwards of 10 seeds per rosette. You have up to say, typically we see about 3 to 6 rosettes per plant. So relatively low compared to other species, but they're very large seeds. So they end up anchoring locally, but really have a pretty decent viability, but are really different as well.
And then I guess, Rob, I know it's not a true seed, but I guess on the flip side of that, probably a pretty low viability with Tyrions from water soldier. Like, it's a pretty fleshy piece, right? So I'm sure it probably doesn't last too long.
I don't think it would.
We just had one more question come in. I think so it's about year-over-year weevil population. So somebody's asking if, Amanda, if we do a great job at collapsing an established milfoil population, do you tend to move along to another body in the lake? Do you know? Do we have any information on how the others are moving around?
It's kind of interesting because we have seen how patches. So we kind of mapped out the lake in different sections, like A to K, let's say, based on bays and stuff. And in one sort of bay or area, we'll see that a particular patch has moved, and the weevils will sort of kind of move with it. So yeah, as soon as like their food source is out, they will seek something else. For
Okay.
Sure. Okay. Close enough, right? And like they're terrible swimmers, they're not going to be able to get from one stretch of the lake to the other. But we've seen that there is a healthy enough population of milfoil there that they will be able to find some sources of food.
Okay. And I guess just to, because anybody tuned into our webinar last week, we had a great webinar presented by Rob Better from Agriculture and Agri-Foods Canada, just talking about the whole process behind releasing a biological control agent. And just to kind of clarify that point, that Rob was really presenting on biocontrol agents in classical biocontrol, which is going to where the plant is native to, finding its enemy there, and then having that idea of can we release it here within its invasion range. And so that's kind of a nice juxtaposition against the milfoil weevil, right? Because the milfoil weevil is native here.
Yes, native here. I believe it was their native northern milfoil, which I think it started feeding, it was the main source of food and habitat initially. And then when the invasive Eurasian came in, and probably around that time, the northern would have started producing some secondary compounds or something that would try to deter the weevil with something that the Eurasian didn't have. Not deterred by it.
Okay. So weevils prefer the taste of Eurasian.
Yeah, they prefer the taste of Eurasian. You will still find them on the northern, but not in the same numbers.
That's great. So we just had a quick question about turions. So turions are the reproductive unit?
Yeah, so turions are essentially a seed-like structure that water soldier has, and it grows into one water soldier plant can have multiple turions and offsets, and that's its main means of reproduction.
It's kind of like a spider plant, right?
Yeah,
like it's
like a runner. Yeah.
Okay, great. So that would be kind of a genetic clone, I guess, really, of, right, this is asexual reproduction. We're talking about just cloning yourself.
No seed reproduction that we found. So every plant in the Trent waterway has come from plant.
Terrible movie sequel title in there somewhere. Okay, so I think that, yeah, so just to confirm, yeah, so like runners, yeah. So, yeah, exactly. So I think that wraps up the questions. I'll give you everyone one more minute just very quickly. If you do have a burning question, now's your time to type it in. I hope I've gotten to them all, and if I haven't, I apologize. If you could just kind of rehash them in, I'd appreciate it. But I think we've got to them all here. So thanks very much for everybody for tuning in. And just as a quick primer for next webinar, we have in 2 weeks from today, Wednesday at noon during the lunch hour, we're going to have Eric Cleland from the Nature Conservancy talk to us about the overwater Phragmites spraying project that's happening in southwestern Ontario. So a lot of interest there, certainly. I'm sure it's going to be another well-attended webinar. We're going to have a recording of today's webinar posted very shortly on our website. So if you followed that registration page, it's www.ontarioinvasiveplants.ca/webinars. If you've been there before, that is the site for all of our presenters' slides to be posted. We're going to post recordings from this webinar and other past webinars. So it's a resource. I encourage you to check it out. And we will have registration up for our Phragmites herbicide webinar, I guess, posted hopefully by the end of the day. So feel free to check back. But again, that's going to be 2 weeks from today, same time, same place. So thanks much, everybody, for tuning in today. Thank you very much again from our three presenters, Kyle Borrowman, Amanda Cooper, and Rob McGowan. Appreciate your time and expertise today, and we look forward to hearing from you again in the future. Thanks very much, everybody.